Ratchet and Clank 3 is straight up my favourite game. It's just so fun, has such good memories of it. I'm a big fan of the series. I've played most of the games to 100%, but it's been a while since we've had a proper game in the franchise. Like, we had All for One, that was a thing, and there was Q-Force, that was even less of a thing. Since A Cracking Time, there's been a lack of games of that sort. So, PS4 Ratchet and Clank, is it as good as I hoped it would be? Let's find out. So the game acts as sort of a remake of the original game and a reboot of the series as like a tie-in to the recent movie that came out alongside the game. The joke being that it's a game based on a movie based on the game. So if you don't know the general plot, Clank is a defect war robot who escapes from the facility where they create them and they send people to hunt him down. He comes across Ratchet, who wants to be sort of a hero and save the galaxy, and they end up teaming up together in order to take on Chairman Drek and his alien race that want to sort of create a new planet for themselves, having polluted their previous one. Now, the original game didn't have too much of a plot. It was fairly basic, but with a lot of comedy. In order to make up for that, it was sort of a fun platformer. In this one, they try, as it ties into the movie, to make it more of a cinematic experience. They introduce new characters. They have Ratchet join the Space Force, or whatever they're called, and he teams up with Captain Quark and new characters who aren't particularly interesting in order to try and become a hero and save the galaxy. And it's more of his struggle. This doesn't work, just straight up. I don't mind the fact that they tried to add a bit more plot to it, but I feel like the writing is a little poor. It's like it's unclear who its audience is. It's trying to appeal to the fans of the original games. It's like, look, here's Captain Quark, he's everyone's favourite character, he was always funny. Here's wacky going-ons and cool stuff, but at the same time it's trying to build this epic plot that just kind of isn't there. The new characters are sort of weak imitations of previous ones, and nobody's particularly well fleshed out. They don't really have any backstory, there's not any reason to care about the game, and the sort of tone fits more of the younger audience. It's slightly tacky and not particularly funny. And this isn't true for the whole way through. On occasion it is fine, but for the most part it's just a little... And also, the game has a lot of cutscenes now, which does really affect your playthrough. I mean, the cutscenes really take you out of the action as you just kind of keep wanting to play, and it's a snapback. On the other hand, the visuals are really nice. This is probably the best the game's ever looked. They've always been really good looking games. I mean, look at the ones back on PS2, they still hold up pretty well visually, as this one really does. It's just a very pretty game, straight up. Gameplay wise, it plays in a similar fashion to the other previous games in the series. There's a lot of platforming, with Clank acting as the main platform way, as you have like your helicopter pack and your rocket pack, and solving puzzles. However, the puzzles in this one are far and few between and very limited. The platforming isn't too bad, the platforming is decent, but again, there's not too much of this in general. They do, however, add some jetpack sections where you can fly around. These were probably the best parts of the game, as they opened up the world quite a bit. And from this, instead they kind of made it more action heavy with shooting, which doesn't work too much. It was in the original game, however because you couldn't upgrade your weapons in the original game and you kind of just had what you were, you're a lot more driven playing through sort of speedruns. This kind of incorporates the weapon upgrades that it had in the later game, but it doesn't feel as distinct. There's not as much changes in the weapons as you play through the games, and I played through to 100% upgrading all the weapons, and it didn't really seem like it was worth it. Some of the additions in this game are quite cool. There's some that do stand out, like the pixelizer, turning enemies into pixels. They reuse some of the other classic weaponry as well. That bit is still as good as always, but it's just, they've not really done anything new, and if anything it feels slightly less advanced gameplay wise than previous ones in the series. In this game it's a lot of just going to set planets, going through things like you did in the original game. However, they've not as many planets as in the original game. They've seemed to have taken out certain levels in exchange for other ones, which aren't quite as good generally. They're trying to make it more advanced like the later games, but there aren't it doesn't differ too much. The side quests, the side things like where you're going around in your own ship, aren't particularly good. They're not very interesting, and they break you out of the mold slightly. On top of this, there just aren't many memorable levels in Fair. Everything is a little bland. The areas is not the sort of thing where I could go through all the planets and each one's really distinct. In this, they're kind of just ice level, general factory, there's another factory. You do have the Clank levels in this, which aren't too bad, where he's solving puzzles and using the little gadget bots. They were quite enjoyable, however I found they usually went on slightly too long, and the puzzles were a bit mixed. And also they tried to make these slightly more combat heavy, which didn't really work at all. They weren't as good as the Clank sections in A Crack in Time, like not nearly. Also the game's length seems a little short. To 100% the game, it shouldn't have taken me as little time as it actually did. I found all the hidden collectibles without much of an issue, as I maxed out all the weapons. One of the things they did add to this game is specific upgrades for weapons through a different currency, and they also added collectible cards which you use to unlock bonuses and stuff, which seemed quite cool, but there's not really much to it. They don't have a significant difference on how you play the game. I mean, if you just play it enough through, on your second playthrough you will have everything straight up. It's not adding too much straight out, other than find a few hidden cards which aren't that well hidden. They had a few enemy types in this game. The enemies are generally quite varied, and the difficulty of the game is at a nice pace when you do play through on hard. I never really struggled, but there were a few bits where I had to think through and be careful with what I was doing. The enemy AI was actually fairly good. Because it seems like they're sort of using the same systems they've always had, they have tried to upgrade it a bit and make it so you can't super break the games. However, I did find there to be quite a few glitches occasionally. Some of the metal platforms I would just fall off whilst walking on, which was an issue, and a few areas like he just struggled to move around. It didn't feel great to move around in general. The music's as good as always. It's not the most standout soundtrack, but it is highly decent. The ending of the game is a little lame because they kind of have a twist and it doesn't really work along the plot line. In the game as well, they also have Dr. Nefarious as a character, and it feels like they just shoehorned him in because he was a popular character later on, and he's just there and not the same character, and also really lame. The final boss battle is not great. It gives you the most powerful weapon in the game, or you can get the most powerful weapon in the game just before the final boss battle, and using that just defeats them almost instantly. It's really anticlimactic. I guess there's not too much else to say about this game. It's not bad, it's a decent entry into the franchise, however it's just one of the weakest entries into the franchise so far. By concentrating more on plot and thinking they've kind of got the gameplay methods down and can just reuse it and add new weapons, it doesn't do much. It feels like this game sort of lacked creativity, and it lacked the flourish that I loved from the other games in the franchise. I did enjoy it, but it's the kind of thing I'd play through once and then throw aside. I mean, even 100%ing it didn't seem like much of an achievement. I didn't get the same feel I got out of the other games in the franchise, which was an issue. I want to see what they do after this. I'm hoping they do something good, but this game was sort of, if you want to remake the first game, it has to be better than the first game, and this one wasn't. It was shorter and not as enjoyable as the first game by any means. It sort of tried to do too much and pull it back so it wasn't as advanced as the later games at the same time, by trying to please two fan bases by like not upsetting the fans of the original game and by appealing to the newer fans of the later games. It hasn't really met either of those goals, and it's not a game that straight up appeals to anyone in general. So at the end of the day, I'm probably going to have to give the new Ratchet and Clank on the PS4 a 7 cute robots out of 10. I mean, it is a good game. It's a fairly good game in general, which is why I've given it a high score. It's just disappointing, and that's its main issue. It's a disappointment that I feel like is just going to be forgotten. And I really hope that the next game in the series does bring me something new and gives me the same feel that Ratchet and Clank 3 did. Anyhow, this is Touch of Weeb, and until next time.